The Kansas City Chiefs are going a different direction in the backup QB situation. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but they have some decisions to make when it comes to George Karlaftis and Trent McDuffie today on Locked On Chiefs.
From the land of the free and the home of the Chiefs, this is the Locked On Chiefs podcast.
Welcome back, Chiefs Kingdom, and welcome back to another episode of Locked On Chiefs, your daily podcast covering the Kansas City Chiefs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Thank you for always making Locked On Chiefs your first listen of the day. Don't forget, we're free and available on all platforms, including YouTube as well. I am Chris Clark from Chiefs Corner. This is Matt Derrick from Chiefs Digest. We have a lot we're going to be talking about today. We're going to talk about Mahomes. We're going to talk about the possible fifth-year option for McDuffie and Karlaftis. Lot to talk about in all this different stuff. We got some actual numbers from Derek Stingley as well, so that's going to play in a little bit later. But we are going to start off with Mahomes. But today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase at Game Time. Really looking forward to talking about McDuffie and Karlaftis, their fifth-year options, a little bit later in the show. But I want to start off with talking about Patrick Mahomes because he's in unfamiliar territory from where he's been his first couple of seasons in the NFL. He is actually the elder statesman at the position at QB for the Chiefs. That is not something that he has ever been in this locker room until this year.
Yeah, he's going to be 30 in September, and Gardner Minshew turns 29 in May. So yeah, he's going to have not only age but more experience on Gardner Minshew. But Minshew, let's face it, he's been around long enough that he's seen a lot. He's been a lot of different offenses. So there's some things that I think that he can share with Mahomes. He's also has some commonality, and he was with Doug Peterson in Jacksonville. So, he's got some connections there as far as, the Andy Reid offense and some experience with it. But he's also got some other experience that I think that he can bring in. But here's one thing that I really kind of picked up on from and kind of connect with what Brett Veach said at the Combine about how, Mahomes has maybe seen so much that, maybe he sees things now that aren't there as far as what defenses are doing to him and playing a little bit differently. And, and sometimes we probably have seen a little bit less of that gunslinger mentality that Mahomes has had. And I kind of even connect a little bit of that to, the turnovers that they had last year on throws that weren't his fault, that maybe between the protection issues and the ball security issues that, maybe he just hasn't been pushing the ball as much in the windows, not about the deep shots as much as just about, putting it in places that he normally does. And he's probably had quarterbacks for the most part in his experience in that quarterback room, but when they're looking at film, they're probably saying, hey, why didn't you check it down here? Or why didn't you go to this option here, the safer option? Gardner Minshew is probably going to be the guy in the quarterback room saying, why didn't you put it in this window? Why didn't you throw it to this? Why didn't you sling at this guy? Look, he's, hey, I don't care that the window's 3 inches wide. You can get the ball in there. Why don't you put it there? And maybe that's what Mahomes needs, is just a different perspective. And I think that's one thing that Brett Veach and Andy Reid have been really good with Mahomes, has been giving him different voices and different perspectives in that quarterback room.
Well, and it's interesting because you're talking about a situation where if you go back to Alex Smith and who he learned from to start, Alex Smith was not a gunslinger type quarterback really ever when he played in the NFL. He was a guy that would take what was there. He was smart enough to know where the ball should be going, generally speaking, based on the coverages that were showing up. So he was getting the ball where it should go, but he wasn't trying to force things, generally speaking. Now, I'm not trying to take anything away from him. There were times where he pushed it because he had to, and all QBs do that when they absolutely have to. But generally speaking, he would be a guy that would not turn the ball over a ton, and that's generally what Mahomes has done mostly in his career. He hasn't turned the ball over a ton. Last year was a little bit of an anomaly in that regard. But I like what you're saying about Minshew. It's a different aspect. It's something different that he hasn't dealt with in a different voice, because now you're looking at a guy, all of the QBs that have been behind Mahomes lately have had less experience, like playing, more experience maybe in age and seeing film and whatnot, but in playing, they've all been behind Mahomes in experience. But now you have a situation where he's also the elder statesman in age. And that's going to likely continue because I can't imagine Kansas City is going to be looking to get older quarterbacks than Patrick as he continues to get a little bit older.
Yeah, and there's obviously you don't want to overlook either just the aspect of your backup quarterback being able to give you a chance to win. And with the older quarterbacks that the Chiefs have been going to, I mean, for the most part, you would be kind of going back to an Alex Smith type of offense if something happened to Mahomes. And when you had had to play without him, you had been going to more of a ball control offense. With Minshew, you wouldn't have to change the offense as much. I mean, obviously, being this a little bit younger than Mahomes, he has some mobility. I don't think he's as nimble as Mahomes is and as athletic as Mahomes is, but he's got some mobility, so he can move around in the pocket. He can escape if necessary. But like I said, he's also got that gunslinger mentality. So I don't think you have to change the offense as much because even though no, Gardner Minshew is not Patrick Mahomes. I think the Chiefs feel like, hey, this is a guy that if you had to play a handful of games without Mahomes, he can give you a chance to, keep you what you want as the Chiefs. You want to be at least 500 to just keep your hopes alive. So if you had to play with Mahomes for, say, a month, you're not going to get buried and be, have a 4-game losing streak and be out of the playoff hunt. They feel like, hey, Minshew can be a guy that can keep them above water.
And the interesting thing, and I'm sure this played into it just a little bit, is that the Raiders are likely paying Minshew more than the Chiefs are, would be my guess. Contract hasn't been announced yet, but basically the Raiders still owed him, I think, over $3 million in guaranteed money. So I would imagine that this is probably a league min type deal, and the Chiefs are paying that, and the Raiders are paying the balance. So the Raiders may be paying almost double what Kansas City's paying, and I'm sure that also plays into how they are going to feel about the contract.
Yeah, I made a joke last week about how, hey, there's a chance that Gardner Minshew's playing for free, that, the Raiders are going to pay him anyway. So he could be sitting at home on a couch and he might be making as much money because chances are the Chiefs, if he got a minimum salary type deal or even one with some incentives, there's just a chance that the Raiders are still going to be paying him this year. But then again, Kendall Gambin, former Chief, when I said that, he pointed out, say, don't overlook the year of experience and credit towards your pension, because that's just as important to Gardner Minshew as the salary. So another year in the league and another year towards your retirement is pretty valuable too.
No, absolutely. So that's something that I would not have ever considered. So that is a great point. I do think that when you look at this, though, in the overall picture, it's interesting because not only did they do this they go out and get Gardner Minshew, they have Chris Oladokun, who they've had there for several years, but then they also bring back Bailey Zappe. And obviously they've always usually had 4 QBs at camp, so it makes sense that they're going to have 4 QBs at camp. But now you have to wonder, is Oladokun going to be the odd man out possibly? And Zappe have a real chance because he came in last year late and didn't really have a real good chance to, be on the roster or be on the practice squad and stay in Kansas City.
Yeah, Bailey Zappe wasn't around for very long. He came in there after the roster cut reduction deadlines, and Oladokun was, he was gone at that point. It was Bailey Zappe was the practice squad quarterback, and until Zappe went to Cleveland for a chance to try and play. So it was a kind of a, it was a short experiment with Bailey Zappe, but clearly the Chiefs saw enough and like enough in him. They want to see what he's got. So yeah, it's a battle between him and Chris Oladokun for that 4th spot. And I think you do have to give a chance, an edge to Zappe because he has started in this league. And obviously the Chiefs see something that they like. And I assume that the Chiefs have probably said to Zappe before they signed him is like, hey, look, if you come back the second time, we want you to fight for this, and we want you to be here. If we give you that 3rd quarterback job, we want to know you're into this and that you're just not here to further yourself, and that the first time somebody comes along and offers you a spot on the 53, that you're out of here. They want him to be around for a while, at least a season. So we'll see how that all works out. But if the Chiefs don't feel like that the commitment's there from Bailey Zappe, they still have Oladokun around.
Well, and the nice thing is that now he'll have the entire offseason to basically work in the quarterback room with Patrick Mahomes, get ready for OTAs, get ready for mini camp, get ready for training camp. Everything that he didn't have in Kansas City last year, he'll have this year. And that's a big change when you start talking about QB play, QB feeling comfortable in the system. And they let Oladokun go to have Zappe as their practice squad quarterback. So that tells me, I agree with you. I think that he's already kind of ahead in that regard, and he's got experience. So I think that gives him an advantage in this regard, or in this scenario.
Yeah, and there's I mean, this is a little tiny benefit, but it's an added benefit to me, which is that, Mahomes has a lot of off the field commitments. And that's one thing that gets in the way sometimes during OTAs, so that when they do have those 10 practices during offseason workouts, sometimes Mahomes has to miss a few just because he's got other things going on. He sometimes has missed some practices. Now, instead, if Mahomes isn't there, now you've got 3 veteran quarterbacks who've been around and been in this system for a while. And even though Oladokun doesn't have as much playing experience as the other 2 guys have, he's been around for a while. So you're not getting reps with, a third or a fourth quarterback with a guy who doesn't know what he's doing and is a young guy with no experience. You're still got 3 quarterbacks out there if Mahomes isn't there for OTAs, or a portion of them, that can keep practice going, and you don't feel like you're just trying to work around the quarterback, and you can still get quality work done.
And that's important. This team is got to get ready for the 2025 season, and is going to be here before you know it. We're going to be talking about the NFL draft here in the coming weeks. That is going to be coming up. But the Chiefs also have a decision to make shortly after the draft, with 5th-year options with Karlaftis and McDuffie a little bit later, right after this. The energy of the crowd and witnessing unforgettable moments. There's nothing like experiencing a big game in person. Getting tickets shouldn't be stressful. That's where Game Time comes in, making it easier than ever to grab last-minute seats at unbeatable prices. Game Time Picks. Curation makes it easier to find better value for tickets to sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and much, much more. I just checked the Game Time app, and there are amazing deals on some huge matchups coming up. The lowest price guarantee or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. With seat views before you buy, no surprise fees, and a lowest price guarantee, you can book with total confidence. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. That's LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, so when we look at this and we start looking at the decisions that need to be made, we kind of already talked about how the salary cap, the Chiefs still have about $27 million because we still don't know numbers on several players. Nick Bolton, Christian Fulton. Don't really know Gardner Minshew's number either, although I don't think that's going to affect the cap too much right now. But the question becomes, what are they going to do in the future? Because they have 2 first-round picks that they drafted a couple years ago in Trent McDuffie and George Karlaftis that they have to decide on by, I think you said May 5th when we were starting to talk about what we were going to talk about today. That is going to be here right after the draft. Obviously, that makes sense because they're going to want to see what they get in the draft and then decide, do we want to pick up the 5th-year option? McDuffie, which we'll talk about the next segment, is pretty much a no-brainer in my mind. You and I kind of mentioned yesterday, or you mentioned specifically, Karlaftis is maybe up there a little bit. I still think it's a no-brainer, but it is a question.
Yeah, and double check, the deadline's May 1st, always changes a little bit based on the calendar. Yep. But, George Karlaftis, his 5th-year option is going to be almost $15.2 million. And, based on what he's done to this point, yeah, you probably could lean towards a no-brainer. I think that the Chiefs do pick it up because I do think you want to control that 5th year. And Karlaftis has been good. Has he been elite? Has he been to the point where you're ready to offer him a $20+ million extension? I'm not sure that case has been met, but I think the bigger question with Karlaftis is probably less about whether or not you pick up the 5th-year option, and it's just more like, if you're the Chiefs, if you're not planning on keeping George Karlaftis past year 5, it's what is your plan for him? Do you trade him now? Do you trade him in 2026? Do you just let him walk after 2026? You've got 3 different windows here to think about, and each one of them has their benefits and their drawbacks.
Yeah, and I think the big thing for me, you talk about giving him a contract over $20 million. That would be like middle of the road for defensive ends at this point, which I think he actually probably qualifies for something closer to a $20 million contract. Because when you look at the top of the line, Myles Garrett just got $40 million a year. Karlaftis shouldn't be getting anywhere near that, and I grant you that. But the reality is that market with where Garrett's contract is going to be coming in is really going to change over the next year or two, because everybody's going to be pulled up by that huge number at 40.
Yeah, and when you get to, I think right now looking at it, Greg Rousseau is, I think, the 11th highest paid edge rusher and making it $20 million. And I mean, I can tell you, from talking to George Karlaftis, I'm pretty sure he considers himself to be one of those top 10 guys that's worthy of being 20 million. So by a year or 2 years from now, I think he's definitely going to see himself in that category. So that's going to be the question. If you're the Chiefs and you want to get something done, and it takes two sides. So if the Chiefs do feel like that George Karlaftis is a guy that they want to keep beyond his 5th year and they want to keep him for years 6, 7, and 8, obviously you'd like to try and get something done earlier, because the earlier you do it, the lower the amount is going to be. It's going to be cheaper to sign him long-term now than it would be after the 2025 season, and most likely cheaper than if you sort of try to sign him after the 2026 season. But if you can't make a deal, and if George Karlaftis is like, I'd rather prove myself on the field, and honestly, I mean, based on what you've seen to this point, George Karlaftis has been good. Has he been great? No. I mean, that's why I think that if you're the Chiefs, you'd probably say you need to see more. That he just hasn't necessarily justified, being one of the 10, 15 highest paid players at his position. That's the challenge if you're the Chiefs. Do you project that he's going to be worth that in 3 years?
Yeah, and so I'm looking right now, because you make a great point when you start talking about Rousseau. Gregory Rousseau has a contract for $20 million a year. In his career, he has 25 sacks, 135 solo tackles, 6 forced fumbles. George Karlaftis, 24.5 sacks, 68 solo tackles, 1 forced fumble. Obviously, the forced fumbles is a little bit different. You can say what you want about that stat. And the solo tackles is a little different, obviously, as well. But defensive ends are paid on sacks. They're almost identical. And Rousseau just got a $20 million contract.
Yeah. And, you go on further down, and I mean, if the Chiefs, if you were able to get something with Karlaftis that was in the high teens, I think that's actually not a bad deal. But is that something that Karlaftis would sign?
And actually, now that I think about it, Rousseau's been in the league 1 more year. So he's got 4 years where Karlaftis has only played 3, and Karlaftis basically has the same number of sacks. So you could easily make an argument from George's perspective that he is well worth what Gregory Rousseau is getting paid. And that's a contract that the Chiefs are going to have to figure out if they want to pay him. That's a contract that they really haven't paid a defensive end since Frank Clark got a contract kind of like that. Dana's $8 million a year, I think. Amenahue was $8 million a year. Dana's somewhere not too far. But I just don't know. Can you pay him that, especially when you have Trent McDuffie, who we're going to talk about in the next segment?
Well, and that's the question is that it gets down to is, even though they're the Bills and you've got, Mahomes and Josh Allen cancel each other out. You got the same problems. But, do you view George Karlaftis as the guy that you're going to pay when Chris Jones comes off the books? Is he going to be that guy for you? I mean, that's the question that if you're the Chiefs, you have to answer, which is is George Karlaftis the guy that is going to take over this defensive line from Chris Jones? If he is, you pay him. If not, then I think you got to start looking at what you could get, because if you were to trade George Karlaftis, can you get a first-round pick for him? I don't know. I mean, you might just have to check and see what other teams see out there, what the potential value is.
If you were a betting man, are they picking up the 5th-year option?
I think they do pick up the 5th-year option, because I don't think there's really any reason not to. There's a lot more flexibility that comes with it. Has he justified making at least that much money? Yeah, I mean, I think you'd get your money's worth on a 5th-year option. But again, the question comes back down to, do you see George Karlaftis in this organization beyond year 5? And if so, once again, when you decide the idea of shopping him around or seeing what his value is around the league, that's pretty key.
Well, and I think the bigger thing when you talk about the 5th-year option is you pick up the 5th-year option because it gives you other options. Because at this point, now you have him under contract for this year and next year, and if you decide you're going to shop him, you at least have him under contract for $15 million a year, and you know that, and whoever you're shopping him to could also know that they've got him under contract for at least that, and they're going to be working on an extension, but you do have him for that extra year. So I do think that this option gets picked up regardless of how they feel about him being in Kansas City in 2027 and beyond. When we get back, we're going to talk about the guy that is going to that really is probably looking at Derek Stingley's deal going, okay, yeah, I'm ready to get that $30 million a year contract, but is that really what it is? We'll get to that right after this.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the bracket breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
Trent McDuffie, it's a no-brainer that they pick up the 5th-year option, in my opinion. I don't think that either of us probably disagree on that. But the bigger question, especially considering it's less than George Karlaftis' 5th-year option, but the bigger question is, do you sign him to a long-term deal? And before the break, I mentioned that Derek Stingley got a deal for, everybody's talking in the 3-year extension for $30 million a year. That's not really the case when you start looking at the contract, is it?
Everything is true from a certain point of view, Chris, when you start talking about NFL contracts and extensions. It's 3 years added onto his rookie contract, and there's $90 million in new money. So a lot of people are going to tell you, yeah, it's 3 years, $90 million. Now, in no year out of the next 5 years does his cap number exceed $27.5 million. So how it is average is $30 million is a little bit of a challenge there. And it doesn't change 2025. 2025 is pretty much what it is. What changes in 2025 is it gets a $25 million signing bonus. So he gets some of that money up front. And yeah, you're spreading that $90 million over essentially 5 years. What changes in 2026 is the amount for his 5th-year option added up $4 million to that. And then the rest of that money is all going into 27, 28, and 29. And those years, they have some rolling guarantees in there that would pretty much tie him to Houston through 2028. 2029 kind of would be an option year, but the way this is built, if he's still a peak player, you're absolutely picking that up and keeping him around through 2029. So is it 5 years for $90 million? Is it 4 years, $90 million? Is it 3 for 90? Or if you just look at cap number, is it 5 for 118.6? That's how I look at it. And this number, I think it comes out to 23.7 or 24.7 million over the next 5 years. Looking at these numbers as they've come out, if Trent McDuffie would sign this contract, I think I'd sign it to him today.
I would have given it to him yesterday. Just saying, no questions asked. Here's your contract. This is what drives me nuts about NFL contract reporting. I have been looking for the Nick Bolton contract. Still don't have that information yet. We will get it out as soon as it's out there. But you look at the Stingley contract, and everybody kept saying 3 years, $90 million. I sat there, I was like, yeah, I doubt it. And we finally have the numbers. It's not 3 years, $90 million. It's really 5 years for 23.7 or 24.7, like you said. 23.7, I think, makes a little bit more sense. But and I'm not saying that's not a good contract. It is, but it's not what it's getting sold as. So, the players are going to argue, it's $90 million over 3 years. Not really. $25 million this year for a signing bonus and $4 million next year is part of that additional $90 million. And then you have base salaries of 20, 21, and 21 in 27, 28, and 29. So to me, I'm absolutely with you. If they want to give this contract to McDuffie and he will sign it, I would sign it today. No questions asked. Get it done. And they have the salary cap space to get it done. It would be close, but his salary cap number for 2025 would be 12 million basically. And McDuffie's right now is 4, so it'd add about 8. They have the ability to do it. That's before even dealing with the Trey Smith contract extension, and that could change how they do the Trey Smith contract extension. So to me, if I'm Kansas City, I get this deal done immediately and don't wait for another shoe to drop, because I'm guessing Sauce Gardner is going to be paid more than this.
Yeah, and there's another, kind of element to this as well, which is that, Trent McDuffie's gotten hosed for the fact that he hasn't been named to any Pro Bowls. He's been all pro for 2 years,
right?
But he hasn't been on a Pro Bowl. And that's the criteria in the collective bargaining agreement for whether or not the 5th-year option gets accelerated. So Derek Stingley's 5th-year option for 2026, he was going to get paid $17.6 million. Trent McDuffie is in line to get paid $13.6 million. So he's going to make $4 million less anyway. And then when you talk about the fact that if this is a $23.7 million average per deal, if you're Trent McDuffie, you're talking about, and remember, that would be over the next 5 years, including these next 2 seasons, plus 3 more after that. If you're Trent McDuffie, you're basically would be getting a $19 million raise this year. You'd be getting a $10 million raise next year. I mean, the fact that Trent McDuffie is going to be underpaid both in 25 and 26, and especially underpaid on that 5th-year option, I mean, there's more motivation for the player, because now if you're Trent McDuffie and you got to play through 2 seasons without getting hurt and hoping that you're going to hit the market fully healthy and that's when you can cash in, that's a big bet to make. So would be the motivation for a Trent McDuffie, is that he can make a lot of money and insure himself now. And I'm with you. I mean, even though this is Derek Stingley, and people around the league will tell you Derek Stingley's better than Trent McDuffie. I'm not necessarily in that camp. I think McDuffie's a lot closer to Stingley than a lot of people around the league do. And clearly the Pro Bowl voters think that Derek Stingley's better than Trent McDuffie. But I mean, I would pay him like Derek Stingley. And if Trent McDuffie wants to sign this deal and say it's worth $30 million a year, so be it.
Take the thought process of Pro Bowls being what matters for the 5th-year option and how that works out for a second. Is a player going to care more about making the Pro Bowl or an All-Pro?
It depends on whether or not you're named to one of those teams. If you're a 10-time Pro Bowler and you've only made the All-Pro twice, you're going to say Pro Bowls are what matters. If you're voted All-Pro every year, you're going to say that. Although most players are always going to tell you that All-Pro carries more weight than Pro Bowl, because,
and that's my point.
You don't have alternates. There's a smaller number selected. So like I said, hey, whatever you get, you're going to be more proud of. But if you're named All-Pro and Pro Bowl, you're gonna still say the All-Pro probably matters more.
Right. And if it wasn't for the contract situation in this case, what's really going on with that, I do think McDuffie is probably going to be caring more about. And my whole point is, I think the player is going to care more about that perspective. Yeah, he cares about what the fan thinks, because Pro Bowl voting is a lot of fan voting. But more so when you start looking around the league and you look at the guys that are voting for All-Pro, that's where that's coming from. So I do think that it's going to be interesting. This is not an option for the Chiefs. They need to pick up his 5th-year option. The question is when do they get him signed to a contract extension? Because if you look at it in my perspective, you have one of the best centers in the NFL that they signed last year to a deal after his 3rd year. Now, obviously, it's a little different because they have McDuffie for an extra season than they would have had Creed Humphrey. But to me, if you're going to sign somebody, you try to sign them as soon as you possibly can. This is the window to do the Trent McDuffie deal. Try to get it done and try to have it set for the next couple of seasons. And at that point, you have your corner taken care of, and you can go and build your roster around that.
Yeah, and that's why, to me, I mean, it's not even just the Derek Stingley deal, but you look at the J.C. Horn, you look at the Patrick Surtain contracts, and, are those something that you could live with? I mean, I look at the numbers, and, I think the J.C. Horn deal, is $112 million over the same number of years as far as the cap number goes. So I think you could probably argue that Derek Stingley's is a little bit more. Patrick Surtain's is a little bit. I think it's got some void years on the end of it, but he's going to be getting like $122 million in cash. They're all pretty close to that number. So if you're talking about that, if you're just talking about, and let's set aside the whole argument of whether 90 million over 3 years is, or 5 years or 4 years or how many ever it is, and how you want to claim that the APY is. But, let's take a look at Surtain's. I mean, he's going to be, under control with the Broncos with his extension for 6 years at $122 million. Stingley's is like 5 years for $118 million. If you're telling me that you're going to pay Trent McDuffie $120 million over 5 years, and that's what it's going to cost you as a team, I think I'm doing that right now.
Yep. I'm doing that. I think that he's one of the better players. I don't want to get into where I rank him on this team in player wise, but he's way up there. He's 25 years old. He's going to be playing easily for the next 5 years, I would think, with his game and the way he plays. So this is a deal that I think would be a no-brainer. And I'm glad that we're seeing this type of deal, because people will say 3 years, $90 million. I'd never pay Trent McDuffie that. I'd give him this contract in a heartbeat. Like, I wouldn't do $30 million a year, and that was going to be a problem based on what else is going on in the NFL in that position specifically. But I'd do this contract in a heartbeat.
And the Chiefs, every team's got their little idiosyncrasies. I mean, some teams like void years, some teams don't. The deal for Stingley is pretty straight up as far as there's no trickiness to it. It's a signing bonus and then base salary. There's not little tricky bonuses in it. I would expect that the Chiefs, for the way that they like to structure contracts for their big stars, I would expect that there probably to be more roster bonuses each year that you can then, easily convert into a signing bonus and spread the cap number out differently. So if the Chiefs were going to do this kind of a deal with Trent McDuffie, that's the way I can see them doing it. And there's also a lot of benefit to that as well, in that, hey, if you do that and you limit the signing bonus and you put the guarantees a little bit differently and you guarantee those roster bonuses, with the player, you then make that contract a little bit more tradable. Even though a team is going to have to pick up and guarantee those roster bonuses, it makes it more tradable for the Chiefs down the road, so that if they got into a situation where they needed to or wanted to trade Trent McDuffie, you could move that contract easier than with a contract that's got a big signing bonus, and then say after year 2 you need to eject or you need to move a different direction because, hey, injuries happen, things get sideways, you never know. For maximum flexibility, then you don't have this huge dead cap money and signing bonus that could just hit you all of a sudden. I mean, there's some drawbacks and pluses to the roster bonus structure, but that's one of them, for at least from the Chiefs standpoint, is that if you do need to move those contracts, they are tradable. They're easily more tradable than I think a contract like Stingley.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that Kansas City looks at is, look at what they did this year. They created $50 million in cap space by moving around roster bonuses, and I think their superstars, the people they feel are their superstars, are going to have those types of options in them. Chris Jones fits that category. Obviously, Trent McDuffie fits that category. Obviously Patrick Mahomes fits that category. I think Trent McDuffie could fit that category based on the positional value of corner and what I think he's going to be paid. It makes a lot of sense to kind of do it to where you have the ability to do that type of roster bonus. It allows you flexibility to continue to compete and bring in new talent every single season.
Yeah, it does. And so like I said, every team's got their little idiosyncrasies, and that's one of the reasons why these contracts for the big name corners are all going to differ a little bit. But it's pretty clear. I mean, as far as total money goes, they're all kind of falling in that $120 million over roughly 5-year category. So you got to just kind of sign it up to that. I mean, if you want Trent McDuffie, $24 million per over 5 years, probably pretty close to what you're going to pay.
Yep. And I think that's a deal that the Chiefs should do, and I think that's a deal that the Chiefs will do. We're going to get into a lot more later this week, but thank you all for listening. That is going to be it for us today. Matt, always a pleasure talking to you. Enjoy it every single time. Thank you all for listening, and we will be back to talk to you tomorrow.